Warn your daughter next time.
Warn your son, he's recorded.
She kept her hand on the kennel latch like she owned the air my daughter was breathing. Those were the first words I heard myself spit out when I reached the side yard, and that image has haunted every hour since. My voice cracked, not from anger at first, but because I couldn't process why her wrists were red, why she was curled like an abandoned pup inside something meant for animals. Where are you watching from? I need you to understand what real violation looks like before I take you through what happened next. The woman standing there, Camille Prescott, tilted her chin like she was performing some queenly inspection instead of committing one of the coldest acts I'd ever seen in Hawthorne Ridge. She wasn't yelling. No, that would have been too honest. She was doing something worse, pretending this was normal, pretending nothing here broke a single law. And that's exactly why my blood started burning. You don't even know what this neighborhood protects, she said, sharp, smug, dismissive. The board chair always delivered her injustice in the polished syllables. Smooth tone, smooth cruelty. A violation dressed like etiquette. But before she could stack another layer of authority, I said something that made her eyes twitch. You should have checked who my brother works with. It wasn't a threat. It was colder than that. A warning wrapped in something only she would fear once she understood it. If you've ever felt your entire body turn into a single pulse of rage when someone harms your child, stay close and hit the subscribe button now. I wasn't just a father that afternoon. I was the person responsible for juvenile justice across this entire county. Camille, the enforcer in crimson as some neighbors whispered, forgot that details matter in this world. The kind of details that end cases or start them. The kind that follow digital evidence like shadows. And believe me, shadows don't disappear in sunlight just because the clipboard queen denies them. But before I even processed who shoved that door shut, the sound I remember was my daughter's voice, thin, trembly, apologizing as if she caused her own imprisonment. Dad, I'm sorry. No sound has ever sliced deeper. Children apologize for things adults should burn for. Let me ground you in what this place meant. Hawthorne Ridge wasn't just another suburban maze. It was the community where my daughter took her first steps at the neighborhood gazebo. That structure held memories woven into every column. Birthday pictures, scraped knees, chalk drawings after school. That gazebo represented safety, trust, childhood. And watching her dragged away from that innocence into a metal cage, that was the moment everything I believed about community shattered. Camille, the tyrant in heels when she paced the HOA meetings, pretended this was a temporary safety measure. Her boyfriend, hiding behind her authority, insisted she was trespassing into his yard, my 14-year-old trespassing. In a neighborhood we pay dues to walk through freely. Ask yourself what kind of adults justify locking a minor behind bars meant for animals just to flex control. My daughter was shaking, not crying loudly, not yelling, just shaking in that quiet way trauma settles into the nervous system. I could feel her heartbeat from feet away, and something inside me went very silent. That silence didn't come from fear, it came from training. Law enforcement teaches you that the loudest person in a crisis is usually the weakest one. The quiet person is preparing. Camille's boyfriend, arms crossed like a guard dog, acted almost proud. That pride told me everything I needed to know about intent. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was humiliation, punishment, a performance of dominance to show everyone who controlled this street. When my brother's K-9 unit finally turned the corner later, his presence would rewrite everything about that arrogance. But in that moment, the moment I first touched the kennel door, every cell in my body burned with the memory of cases I've investigated. Children hurt by adults who convinced themselves rules justified cruelty. If you've ever carried the weight of protecting someone smaller, someone who trusts you without question, stay close. This isn't just about my daughter. This is about every parent who's ever looked into the eyes of someone abusing power and realized the only answer was to stand unshakably firm. That day, I decided something quietly. If Camille Prescott wanted to play authority with cages, she was about to learn what a real legal enclosure looks like when the state takes notice. And trust me, cages close both ways. I didn't open that kennel right away. My training told me not to touch anything until I could see her entire body and gauge if she was hurt or just terrified. My instinct as a father wanted to rip the hinges off. That tension between instinct and discipline. That's the part people don't see when they imagine law enforcement parents. We don't get to be reckless, especially when the person who caused the damage stands there acting like she invented neighborhood justice. Camille Prescott crossed her arms like she was evaluating my reaction, not her monstrous choice. I caught the faint smirk she thought I didn't notice, like she believed I'd overreact and prove her narrative right. That's how the board chair always operated. She didn't need to shout. She just needed to document a father becoming aggressive near common property. I heard my daughter whisper, "Dad, please." That whisper still echoes. Not a plea to save her, but a plea not to make things worse. Trauma convinces kids they're responsible for the reaction to the harm done to them. And Camille, the enforcer in crimson, thrived off that imbalance of power. She gestured toward the dog bowl like she was explaining a safety measure. She was just unsupervised near an aggressive animal space, she said lightly, as if that kennel wasn't metal confinement, as if that space didn't reek of cedar chips and dog fear. Suddenly, I felt every case I'd ever worked stack itself behind my heartbeat. Every victim who apologized for existing. Every parent who told me they didn't want trouble with the person hurting their child. And that quiet part of me finally understood the line I needed to cross, not emotionally, but legally. I leaned close enough to check her pupils, claw marks on her wrists, the angle of her shoulders. No dislocations, trembling, no visible blood. My breathing slowed, controlled. That's when Camille, the clipboard queen, began explaining community policy. My silence made her uneasy. She thought I should yell, but yelling is for people who have no leverage. I had leverage she hadn't calculated yet. County juvenile protocols don't allow this kind of containment, I said calmly. Her smile faltered for just a second. The tyrant in heels didn't expect me to sound professional. She expected rage, chaos, male aggression she could report on her precious HOA form. Instead, she heard a sheriff removing emotion from the situation like removing fingerprints from evidence. My daughter's wrists were reddened by the metal grating. That sight didn't leave room for doubt. I unlatched the kennel slowly and lifted her out, letting her lean into me without collapsing. She kept apologizing under her breath. "It's okay," I murmured, even though my insides were one burning question. What kind of humans do this to a teenager? The moment we stepped toward our backyard, Camille's boyfriend tried to block our path, claiming she had been trespassing. He even used legal terms, trespass, unauthorized access, safety concern, as if saying them made them true. But I've spent my entire career separating legal language from legal authority, and what he just did was neither. My neighbors were peeking, half hidden behind hedges, pretending to water their plants. That shameful silence said everything. They'd seen enough patterns from the officer of rules to know confrontation only ended one way: public shaming, violation letters, fabricated witness statements about noise or hostility. This community didn't believe in fairness. It believed in control. I carried my daughter across our side lawn while Camille documented every step with her phone like she was gathering evidence for another HOA complaint. Her boyfriend muttered something about making an example. I ignored him, not because it didn't matter, but because now, legally, everything mattered. I needed clean evidence, chain of custody, timestamps, video storage locations. And yes, I already knew those backyard security feeds recorded audio, which meant her little performance was archived. Once inside our kitchen, I sat my daughter on the counter and inspected her wrists gently. She kept asking if she did something wrong. That question nearly broke me more than the kennel. Abuse makes victims feel like offenders. I've seen that truth destroy families. I wasn't about to let this one become another case file in my memory. My brother texted back, "Where exactly?" I didn't answer immediately because I needed to think, not react. Outside authority had to intervene, but not as retaliation, as proper procedure. My training demanded patience, but the father in me wanted justice faster than breath. And Camille Prescott, believed she could write this entire narrative before anyone noticed what she'd actually done. What she didn't know was that sometimes silence isn't fear, it's preparation. And I was already building the case that would turn her little containment decision into something far more serious than a neighborhood disagreement. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dim light of my living room while my daughter slept on the couch beside me, refusing to be alone in her room. She had the blanket pulled up to her chin, like she was protecting herself from the memory that still clung to her skin. Every few minutes, she twitched, like her brain hadn't convinced her body she was safe yet. And there I sat, planning quietly, reviewing procedures in my head the way I'd done for every traumatized minor I'd ever sworn to protect. The next morning, I drove straight to Hawthorne Ridge's community patrol station, not to confront Camille Prescott directly. I wasn't giving the board chair the satisfaction of thinking she controlled my timing, but because protocol required that I notify local patrol about juvenile endangerment on private property. That meant speaking with Officer Laura Chen. She was the only one with jurisdiction inside the neighborhood, and the only one who'd seen Camille manipulate situations before. When I walked in, Laura looked up with a half-swallowed kind of concern. She tried to hide behind professional posture. Her shoulders stiffened the second she saw my expression. Her hand froze halfway to her coffee, and her breathing hitched slightly before she forced a neutral smile. "Morning, Sheriff," she said, voice steady but eyes uncertain. I could tell she already knew something. Maybe she'd heard whispers. Maybe neighbors had texted her. That's what always happened around the enforcer in Crimson. Rumors spread before facts. So, I didn't give her rumors. I gave her information. Clear, clinical details, juvenile confinement, potential assault, visible injury, emotional trauma indicators. And while I described everything, Laura's fingers tightened around her pen until her knuckles went pale. She didn't interrupt. She barely blinked. She only swallowed hard every time I mentioned the kennel. But when I repeated Camille's excuse about aggressive animal space, Laura shifted her weight, like she wanted to say something she wasn't allowed to say on duty. That body. Language told me more than any statement she could have given. She'd seen enough HOA abuse to recognize this wasn't misunderstanding. It was power being weaponized again. Still, she had to follow chain of command. "I'll need to document your statement," she murmured, eyes darting to the office door like she expected Camille to walk in any second. That alone told me how deeply the clipboard queen had rooted herself into community authority. When a uniformed deputy acts afraid of an HOA officer, something is fundamentally broken. I asked Laura directly if she'd ever received complaints about that boyfriend before. Her hesitation lasted exactly 2 seconds, long enough to know the answer, but short enough to hide it under professional neutrality. "We've had concerns," she finally admitted. That single pause revealed everything. She wasn't protecting Camille. She was protecting her own job. The tyrant in heels had built a reputation, one that punished anyone who dared question her authority. Parents feared losing playground privileges, noise waivers, community access. Even patrol officers feared being reported for bias or inappropriate conduct, because Camille had filed complaints before, multiple ones. She'd weaponized the HOA handbook like a legal shield. Laura leaned forward, fingers tapping nervously against the desk. She bit her bottom lip, a tell I'd noticed years ago during juvenile interviews, and then sighed softly. "Nathan, off record, I've been worried about the way she handles enforcement, but there's a process I have to follow." She glanced at the doorway again, as if she expected the officer of rules to materialize from thin air and file a violation against her breathing pattern. I placed photographic evidence of my daughter's wrists on the table without sliding it forward aggressively. While she reviewed the redness and imprint marks, her breathing changed. Longer exhales, slow inhales, classic sympathetic nervous response to distress. Not her distress, my child's. She finally whispered, "She can't keep doing this," almost to herself. Not defiance, not rebellion, just truth pressing through fear. That internal conflict made my chest tighten, not because she wasn't on our side, but because she wanted to be and couldn't. Not openly. When I left the patrol office, I didn't leave with justice. I left with something more strategic. Confirmation that witnesses existed, even if they were too afraid to testify yet. And fear? Fear can shift fast once a single piece of real authority enters the room. As I crossed the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A neighbor, anonymous number, sent a short message. "Camille is telling people your daughter provoked it." That lie spread faster than truth ever could. But I'd seen this tactic before. Control the narrative early, and you control the consequences. Except this time, Camille Prescott didn't realize something critical. Narratives crumble the second real law steps in. And I had just begun calling in real law. When I stepped back into Hawthorne Ridge, the sidewalks looked the same, but everything about the atmosphere felt altered. Neighbors leaned against mailbox posts pretending to check flyers, but their eyes followed me like I'd suddenly become the threat instead of the parent whose daughter had been thrown into a cage. That's how community power works here. Silent judgment, whispered speculation, shifting loyalties depending on who the board chair is currently targeting. And right that moment, I was the story she wanted circulating. Before I even reached my driveway, a folded violation notice was taped to my front door. No name on delivery, but there didn't need to be. Camille Prescott loved her paper trails. The letter claimed my daughter had created a disruptive environment near a restricted area, and I was being issued a formal warning for interfering with property security protocol. I didn't rip the paper, tempting, but I read every word slowly because criminals reveal more in their wording than anything else. That's something I've learned investigating juvenile statements. Listen to the language, not the performance. I called my brother instead of going inside. He answered on the first ring, the background noise of barking canines echoing like warning sirens. "What did she do exactly?" he asked. I gave him the condensed version, careful with details because protocols matter, especially when you're requesting specialized involvement. His voice dropped to that low tone only trained officers use. "Send me everything, I'll notify the unit commander." That call wasn't about sibling loyalty. It was about chain of command authority stepping into a suburban nightmare controlled by the enforcer in crimson. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again, this time a group notification from the neighborhood message board. "Please refrain from discussing sensitive incidents affecting minors," the message read, written by the clipboard queen herself, implying she was protecting children when she had just traumatized one. The comment thread below hinted at parental overreaction, inappropriate accusations, and law enforcement intimidation. When I saw my daughter's initials typed by anonymous accounts, a heat rolled up my spine I haven't felt since critical scenes in juvenile court. Nobody gets to rewrite what she endured, not while I'm alive. That evening, a community safety walk was announced. The flyer claimed it was about neighbor unity, but every resident knew it was organized by the tyrant in heels as a public relations stunt. She wanted optics, support, visible alignment from fearful families. And she wanted me to appear emotional or aggressive in front of them. But I wouldn't give her the reaction she wanted. Silence is far more dangerous than shouting when you're dealing with someone who depends on noise to justify their accusations. At sunset, I walked toward the gazebo, the symbolic heart of this neighborhood, to participate. Parents gathered around picnic benches, whispering nervously, while Camille's boyfriend stood with arms folded, performing authority he didn't own. My daughter stayed home, curled in a blanket, her safe place now stolen by a cage memory. I wasn't here for community unity. I was here to observe, document, identify witnesses, and assess bias. The gazebo lights glowed like interrogation lamps, illuminating faces that pretended innocence while side eyes tracked me like security cameras. Camille, the officer of rules in this moment, began speaking about neighborhood concerns, implying unsafe behavior from youth on private lawns. Each sentence was crafted like legal phrasing, as if she practiced in front of a mirror before revealing her performance to us. But her mistake was subtle. She referenced juvenile access violations, a term not used in HOA language. That slip revealed something else. She'd been researching law. People do that when they know real authority is coming. I stood there in silence while parents shifted discomfort onto their shoes. One mother looked down every time Camille said safety, like she was swallowing guilt. A father shuffled his feet when Camille mentioned protocol, refusing to look at me directly. Shame doesn't need to confess to be visible. It leaks through posture, breath, and avoidance. Then something happened that changed my calculations. A young teenager, one of my daughter's classmates, kept glancing toward me, then toward Camille, then back toward me. Fear in his eyes, recognition, his breathing fast, his fingers scratching his elbow. Classic anxiety tell in interview rooms. He'd seen something. Maybe he was present. Maybe he knew how she got dragged. That look wasn't random. His eyes darted every time Camille Prescott said, "trespass." That night, I knew we were close to discovery. Victims rarely speak first. Witnesses do. especially youth who saw things adults pretend didn't happen. And the moment a child becomes the silent observer, everything begins to unravel. I walked home under streetlights that flickered like warning signals. My phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. Check the community camera logs. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was someone ready to talk. And Camille didn't even see it happening. When I reached my home office, the house felt too quiet for what my nerves were doing. My daughter had finally fallen asleep in the guest room, a small nightlight casting a soft glow that reminded me she still believed darkness could swallow her whole. I closed the door gently because even that small click felt like a violation after what she'd survived. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't start typing a report. Not yet. I needed to think like the investigator I've been for. 20 years, not the father my rage wanted to become overnight. My phone lit up with another anonymous text. If you saw what I saw, you'd arrest that woman yourself. The sender didn't leave a name, but fear rarely signs its messages. I followed the hint. Community camera logs. Even restricted HOA systems still feed into a larger network when it concerns shared property lines. So, I opened a county access window I don't use lightly, especially not for personal reasons. But this wasn't personal anymore. A child was unlawfully confined, and that crosses jurisdiction I can't ignore. I traced the timestamp from when I found the kennel. The feed captured movement near the side walkway, blurry at first, low resolution, but recognizable. A figure leaning over my daughter, pulling her by the arm toward the metal enclosure. Not Camille yet, her boyfriend. But seconds later, the feed caught Camille Prescott approaching, like she'd been waiting to witness the aftermath. Her posture didn't read shock or concern. It read supervision. Approval. The board chair walked around the kennel perimeter, inspecting it like property, not a prison. She looked down at my daughter, then toward the camera, almost directly at the lens, but didn't react. That told me something crucial. She already knew the angle. People who know where cameras sit don't flinch at being recorded. That implied planning. Or prior knowledge. And that changed everything. I leaned closer, zooming the frame. My daughter's body language said, fear. Shoulders pulled in, chin tucked. Camille, the enforcer in crimson, folded her arms just like she did at HOA meetings, tapping her fingers lightly against her elbow, her trademark gesture whenever she felt powerful. I've seen that gesture in incident photos from past neighborhood disputes. This wasn't new behavior. This was pattern. A knock pulled me out of the feed. My brother stepped into my office still wearing his K9 jacket, the reflective letters flashing as he moved. He didn't say a word about the footage until after he watched it twice. Then he exhaled slowly through his teeth, a sound I'd heard at scenes nobody wants to remember. Nathan? That's unlawful confinement, he said under his breath. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His training spoke louder than volume ever could. And then he did something Camille, the clipboard queen, never expected. He called his unit supervisor right there in my office. When a law enforcement K9 unit initiates a call over juvenile endangerment inside a private property, the situation stops being a community disagreement. It becomes a legal incident. That shift is what I needed. Not anger, jurisdiction. My brother wasn't asking permission. He was reporting observed evidence through proper channels. That placed the matter inside county review automatically, which meant the tyrant in heels had just lost her control of narrative. You cannot manipulate state-level juvenile protocols the same way you manipulate HOA newsletters. While he filed his report, my screen pinged with a new message. This time, a short video clip. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The angle wasn't from community cameras. It was handheld, shaky, teenage voices laughing in the background, and then my daughter's voice saying, "Stop," before the door clanged shut. My pulse hammered so loud, I almost didn't hear my brother whisper, "This wasn't just containment. It was assault. Recorded, distributed, aiding humiliation. Everything she'd denied was documented by the very people trying to harm her." I sent the clip to the county juvenile liaison with a timestamp and brief description. My brother stayed silent, staring at the paused frame where the officer of rules leaned into the scene like she was validating the act. He shook his head slowly. "She's done," he muttered, not as vengeance, simply as fact. In that moment, discovery changed direction. This wasn't about neighborhood law anymore. This was evidence of juvenile endangerment captured on multiple sources, community feed and personal recordings. Outside authority wasn't coming. I had just triggered it. I closed the clip, saved the file, and shut my laptop like sealing a case file. My daughter was asleep down the hall, unaware that the first step toward justice had already begun. Not through shouting, not through revenge, through evidence and procedure, exactly what Camille Prescott never believed I would use against her. Because she underestimated something fatal. I don't fight with anger. I fight with law. And law never loses to playground tyrants. Morning sunlight didn't soften anything that happened the night before. I woke up knowing I'd crossed into a stage there was no coming back from, not emotionally, not legally. My daughter barely touched breakfast, stirring cereal like she was afraid every sound might trigger a memory. I pretended to check emails so I wouldn't pressure her, but inside I was reviewing the footage frame by frame the way I've reviewed juvenile evidence for decades. Except this time, the victim wasn't another family's child. It was mine. I emailed the video clip and camera stills to County Juvenile Services with a written statement, objective tone only, noting visible confinement, minor distress, implied physical coercion. Every word carefully chosen the way I've done for years. Because once you submit evidence, it becomes part of a chain of custody bigger than personal feelings. The moment I clicked send, something settled in my chest. Not relief, confirmation. A line had officially been drawn. Not even 10 minutes passed before my phone buzzed. A number I recognized, County Juvenile Liaison. Her voice wasn't sympathetic. It was procedural, professional, thorough. She requested clarification, timestamps, and confirmation about prior incidents connected to Camille Prescott or the individual acting under her direction. That particular phrasing told me she already understood the pattern. She asked if I believed confinement was punitive. I told her what the video showed. A minor locked in a kennel while the board chair supervised without intervention. Silence on her end. Heavy silence. Then a sentence that tightened every muscle. Sheriff, this may require escalation. While paperwork moved through channels, I drove to the community path behind our house. That walkway, lined with trimmed hedges and decorative stones, had always felt safe. Kids biked here, dogs walked leashes here, parents chatted here. Today, every step felt like walking across a crime scene without tape. I needed to see where the angle lined up with the community security camera. I needed to check lighting, visibility, blind spots. Not to doubt what I'd already seen, but to know how strong the footage would stand when county review began. A neighbor watering flowers froze when she saw me. She looked like she wanted to speak, but fear sealed her lips. She glanced toward Camille's street, then hurried inside. That single reaction spoke volumes about how much control the enforcer in crimson held over this place. Not authority, fear, and fear spreads faster than justice until someone disrupts the cycle. At the end of the path, I spotted two teenagers lingering by the picnic tables. One of them, the same boy who kept staring last night, looked away fast when he saw me. I didn't call him over. I didn't question him. Teenagers open up only when they choose to, not when they're cornered. Instead, I walked past quietly, letting him feel the weight of what he'd seen settle into his conscience. Sometimes, conscience is the loudest witness. Back at the house, my brother was waiting in his SUV. The K9 emblem on the door glinted under sunlight, like a silent announcement that outside authority was already circling. He stepped out, expression unreadable. "County's requesting a preliminary assessment," he said. "They'll need statements, maybe on-site review." Those words hit me harder than any confrontation with the clipboard queen ever could. Juvenile assessment means one thing: legal escalation beyond neighborhood politics. My daughter walked into the living room, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, avoiding windows. When she saw my brother, her eyes softened a little, like she finally recognized a corner of safety that wasn't ripped away. He knelt, voice gentle the way trained officers speak to minors in trauma. She didn't speak, just leaned against him, and that single gesture gave me more fuel than fury ever could. We spent the afternoon documenting visible marks, not dramatic ones, real ones. Red irritation across her wrists, faint bruising near her forearm. My brother photographed them at angles usable in court evidence. Ethical, clinical, not invasive. My daughter asked, voice barely audible, "Am I in trouble?" I swear my heart nearly fractured. I told her no, but the real answer sat heavier. someone else was. Email confirmations continued. Juvenile services assigned a case number. A formal inquiry was opened. And just like that, the tyrant in heels lost jurisdiction she never legally held to begin with. You can bully neighbors, you can intimidate parents, but the moment you harm a child, you step into a world governed by law, not HOA handbooks. I closed the blinds that evening, not to hide, but to plan quietly, precisely, methodically. My daughter deserved more than outrage. She deserved justice. And justice was already moving, step by step, toward the officer of rules who believed cages were only built for others. County protocols move painfully slow until the right witness decides their silence is heavier than the truth they're carrying. That moment arrived 2 days later, when my daughter finally agreed to walk with me to the mailbox at dusk. The street was unusually quiet, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Porch lights flicked on early, curtains fluttered shut, and not one person greeted us. That's how communities behave under intimidation. Everyone pretends they didn't see anything because they're waiting to see who dominates the next move. On our way back, a car rolled slowly past, windows down just enough for someone to speak. "Nathan?" a voice whispered. I recognized the tone immediately. Officer Laura Chen. She didn't meet my eyes directly. She stared ahead, engine idling, voice low enough to avoid attention. "I can't speak officially, but you should know some residents have been pressured to file statements against your daughter." Her jaw tightened, shoulders rigid like she was bracing herself against the very words leaving her mouth. That single confession, quiet, cautious, terrified, meant more than every procedural email I'd received. Chen glanced toward the end of the street where Camille Prescott lived, exhaling a shaky breath like she expected the board chair to materialize from shadows wearing her usual mask of authority. "I've received drafts that were suspicious," she admitted, barely audible. "Language too similar, same accusations, same phrasing. It's like someone provided a template." That was all she said. No additional details, no elaboration. She couldn't. Not without risking her job, but her voice trembled at the edges, betraying more fear than she intended to show. She pressed her lips together, nodded once, and drove off without waiting for my response. That wasn't a conversation. That was a witness handing over a lifeline without leaving fingerprints. My daughter held my hand tightly, and I felt her pulse racing. "They're blaming me," she whispered, tears catching in her throat. I told her the truth. People who abuse power always rewrite the story to protect themselves. And the enforcer in crimson, with her polished voice and manicured intimidation, was rewriting faster than ever now that county review had begun. Back home, my brother was sitting on the back porch, K9 vest slung over the arm of the chair. He stood when he saw our faces, scanning the street like instinct had taken over. "She talked?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He didn't need details. He understood the significance. When the clipboard queen pushes too hard, she forces cracks in her own walls, and those cracks are where truth leaks out. Later that night, I reviewed neighborhood message threads again. This time, subtle shifts appeared, parents asking cautious questions, neighbors hesitant about Camille's version, whispers about juvenile welfare concerns. I recognized one username, Laura Chen Community, not her official account, a personal one. She didn't say anything direct, but she reacted with quiet agreement emojis under posts questioning the tyrant in heels. That was risk enough. She was signaling without speaking. Around midnight, my phone vibrated again. Same unknown number as before. This time a text read, "You need to hear recording from gazebo camera, section B." A link followed. Not the main HOA database, a side storage I recognized as older, rarely checked. Someone was allowing me access, but not claiming responsibility. Fear again. Fear handing me pieces. I played the file. It wasn't the incident itself. It was a conversation after it. Camille's boyfriend laughing with two teenagers, bragging about teaching her a lesson, while the officer of rules said, her father needs to learn compliance like everyone else. That sentence, weaponized compliance, confirmed motive, not accident, punishment. The next morning, I called County Juvenile Services, forwarded the audio with a timestamp, and requested that statements submitted by neighbors be compared linguistically. If multiple residents used identical phrasing, the implication would be coordinated influence. possibly coercion, a violation far beyond neighborhood boundaries. My daughter, overhearing pieces of conversation, asked quietly if we were safe. I looked her in the eyes and told her something more honest than comforting. We're protected by law, not by neighbors. And that truth, though heavy, was the anchor she needed. When the sun set, we received our first official county update. Preliminary investigation validated evidence of unlawful confinement, emotional endangerment, and potential conspiracy to mitigate responsibility. That phrasing alone was enough to tear through Camille's constructed authority. And at the bottom of the notice, one line stood out like a final crack forming in her carefully polished mask. Witness testimony is being reviewed. Internal sources pending confirmation. Those internal sources were already speaking, and Camille Prescott finally had no idea which direction the truth was coming from. The county liaison's email wasn't even an hour old when a new message popped up in our HOA's forum, an official incident review notification, written in Camille Prescott's favorite brand of veiled authority. She claimed the association was aware of exaggerated claims circulating online and reminded residents to respect confidentiality while the board investigates. That phrasing alone revealed panic. When the board chair feels control slipping, she tries to get ahead of the narrative by pretending she's the one initiating oversight. But the county had already taken control, and her announcement was nothing more than camouflage over a burning wall. I forwarded the forum message straight to my brother. His response was immediate. She's scrambling, and he was right. The tone of her post, the sudden concern for due process, the stiff legal terminology, wasn't the voice of confident leadership. It was fear disguised as policy. She used language I'd only seen in HOA litigation responses, which meant she'd called someone for advice, or several someones. I doubted any attorney worth their license would tell her to continue asserting authority after a government agency opened review, but reckless power rarely listens to good counsel. By mid-afternoon, new neighborhood flyers appeared in mailboxes. Community Safety Education Night, sponsored by the Enforcer in Crimson, focusing on responsible youth behavior and respectful property boundaries. She invited families to attend a learning moment about respecting private spaces. Nothing about confinement, nothing about safety violations, just a subtle attempt to redirect blame onto the minor she harmed. My daughter found the flyer on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it was poison. "Is this because of me?" she whispered. I told her gently that when people do something wrong, they try to create distractions, like a magician waving one hand while hiding the trick in the other. She didn't need legal details. She needed to know she wasn't the cause of this. She was the victim of it. That evening, I walked the perimeter of our street again, not pacing, documenting. When the Clipboard Queen hosts an event, she uses community spaces that fall under HOA authority, and that meant cameras, logs, registrations, and attendance lists. Outside authority would want those for comparison once testimony began. I took time-stamped images of flyer postings, noting handwriting differences and streets targeted. She always pushed her propaganda hardest along cul-de-sacs, where fearful families lived. Later, my brother arrived with reports from his unit commander. The county planned to schedule interviews. My daughter would have the option of speaking with a juvenile advocate instead of a uniformed officer, which eased some of my anxiety. I didn't want her reliving trauma in sterile rooms under fluorescent lights. Trauma needs protection, not interrogation. My brother asked if Camille, the tyrant in heels, had confronted us since the investigation opened. She hadn't, but not for lack of desire. The woman who locked a child in a kennel wasn't suddenly remorseful. She was calculating. Abusers hide when law shines a flashlight, not because they feel guilt, but because they're figuring out how to survive exposure. At 8:12 p.m., Chen texted me off duty. "She's preparing a statement claiming you threatened her." My jaw tightened. That tactic wasn't new. Accuse the victim's family, weaponize fear, rewrite history before evidence can speak. But Chen followed with something more valuable. Multiple drafts, identical language. That detail confirmed everything she'd hinted earlier: witness tampering, narrative coordination. If any county investigator noticed linguistic repetition across witness claims, the officer of rules could be accused of orchestrating testimony. Around midnight, I sat alone on the back porch, listening to crickets hum in the dark. I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. I wasn't preparing for confrontation. I was preparing for outcome. And for the first time, I realized how many neighbors silently wanted justice. The anonymous texts, the shaky teenage glances, Chen's subtle help. Fear was cracking and truth was bleeding through the fractures. Right before midnight, another video file arrived from the same unknown number, this time showing Camille passing a sheet of paper to a neighbor at the gazebo picnic table. Her posture was sharp, official. The neighbor repeated phrases that sounded rehearsed. My stomach tightened. That wasn't just influence, that was coaching. I saved the clip, time-stamped it, documented background voices, and wrote a brief description for admissibility. Not vengeance. Evidence, pattern, intent. Because what Camille Prescott never understood is simple. In my world, proof isn't emotional, it's procedural. And her procedures were becoming the very rope tightening around her authority. The morning of the scheduled community safety education night felt heavier than the past few days. Storm clouds clung low over Hawthorne Ridge, pressing the neighborhood into a kind of uneasy hush, as if even the weather understood this wasn't a gathering. It was a performance staged by Camille Prescott to reclaim control. My daughter watched through the blinds as folding chairs were arranged near the clubhouse patio. She flinched every time someone laughed outside, thinking it might be about her. I couldn't erase that fear. I could only work methodically to replace it with justice. I spent the afternoon preparing a sequence of documents, not angry messages or accusations, just evidence logs labeled by time, description, camera ID, and source. Years of investigative work had taught me that you don't win by arguing louder. You win by recording deeper, and the board chair had handed me more documentation than she ever intended. Every threat disguised as protocol, every witness attempt disguised as community concern, it was all evidence once. Someone outside the HOA saw the pattern. My brother texted before the event started. County investigator wants recordings sent tonight. That timing wasn't random. Juvenile authorities escalate faster when ongoing exposure is a risk, and Camille hosting a public gathering while under review could easily cross into witness manipulation. My brother arrived 15 minutes before the event began, standing near his K9 SUV but not stepping into the scene. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Parents suddenly whispered less and watched more. My daughter stayed home, curled with her favorite blanket, watching a show she probably wasn't paying attention to. I left her with my sister-in-law, someone she considered safe, then walked toward the clubhouse. Every step echoed that night by the gazebo, the same path where the enforcer in crimson once paraded her authority like a scepter. This time, I wasn't walking as a resident. I was walking as a witness, and witnesses notice every detail. The event began with Camille, perfectly composed, posture stiff, red blazer crisp even under the humidity. She thanked concerned residents for attending, her voice layered with subtle implication that we should all be grateful she allowed this conversation at all. When she spoke about misunderstandings involving minor behavior, I watched two parents exchange glances, confusion, discomfort, hesitation. Then Camille used the phrase juvenile disruption, the same suspicious wording Laura had mentioned. She wasn't hiding her manipulation anymore. She was broadcasting it, assuming nobody would notice the uniformity of her language. I scanned the group, making mental note of who nodded automatically and who avoided eye contact. One teenager stood near the back, same boy from earlier, hands shoved in pockets, foot tapping nervously. Every time Camille said safety, he swallowed hard, eyes darting toward me before dropping again. That reaction mattered. Trauma in witnesses is often silent but visible in repetitive gestures. I registered his tells, foot tapping, lip biting, blinking pattern, shoulder tension. Someone who'd seen something painful tries to hold still, but their body betrays memory. When the clipboard queen shifted topics toward respectful property boundaries, a woman raised her hand, not defiantly, but uncertainly. "Is this about the kennel thing?" she asked, voice trembling. Camille smiled like a mother correcting a child, insisting it was inappropriate to spread misinformation about youth incidents. That word, misinformation, sealed her narrative attempt. Abusers often use the language of morality to hide immorality. That's when the unexpected happened. Laura Chen stepped onto the patio, not uniformed, just present. She didn't interrupt, she didn't confront. She simply stood where everyone could see her, arms folded, expression neutral. But her presence alone shifted the energy. If the tyrant in heels controlled the HOA, Chen represented the law's quiet shadow. Residents glanced her way before responding to Camille's statements. Fear was rearranging itself, away from Camille toward accountability. Camille continued speaking, voice tightening as she sensed the shift. "We must avoid escalating rumors," she insisted, eyes flicking toward Chen as if expecting disagreement. Instead, Chen simply watched her with a calmness that said more than words ever could. After 15 minutes, I stepped away quietly, typing a short note into my phone. Camille coordinating narrative publicly during active juvenile review. Documentation, not confrontation. My role wasn't to argue. It was to preserve every piece of evidence until the county stepped fully into this arena. That night, after the event, another anonymous message came through. This time, a short audio clip. "She told us not to talk to you." A teenage voice, nervous, whispering. Then a second voice. "She said she'd ban our families." That was no longer HOA policy. It was coercion. That was the officer of rules trying to silence witnesses. And the moment a minor voice entered the evidence chain, everything shifted from the conflict to criminality. I sat beside my daughter's bed, watching her breathe slowly in the dark. Justice wasn't a storm waiting on the horizon. It was already inside the neighborhood, quietly unfolding. And Camille Prescott didn't even realize the foundation beneath her authority was starting to crack. County investigators worked faster than anyone in Hawthorne Ridge expected. By morning, I received an official request for voluntary statements, including availability for an on-site juvenile welfare assessment. The timing was unmistakable. Outside authority wasn't just watching anymore. It was positioning itself inside the neighborhood. My brother called within minutes, voice calm but firm. "They'll be there today," he said. "Not someday. Today." That meant Camille Prescott's window to manipulate witnesses was closing fast. I stepped onto my front porch just in time to see the board chair crossing the cul-de-sac toward a neighbor's home, clutching a stack of documents like shields. Even from a distance, her posture radiated control, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, lips pressed tight. She was preparing her performance, the same rehearsed authority she wore at every HOA meeting. But this time, her stride looked sharper, quicker, the walk of someone trying to outrun collapsing power. The moment she spotted my brother's K9 SUV parked beside my driveway, her steps paused. Just a half second, but enough to reveal panic behind the posture. She turned away abruptly and walked in the opposite direction. If I'd learned anything about the enforcer in Crimson, it was that she feared only one thing: losing the illusion of absolute control in front of the people she ruled by intimidation. Inside, my daughter paced slowly between the kitchen, island, and the living room, clutching her blanket like armor. When she heard the phrase, "visit today," she froze. Trauma does that. It turns anticipation into fear. I knelt beside her, explaining that juvenile advocates weren't coming to question her. They were coming to protect her. "They want to make sure no one hurts you again," I said. Her shoulders loosened slightly, relief and anxiety mixing like storm clouds, clearing just enough for sunlight to peek through. Around noon, a county vehicle rolled into the neighborhood. No sirens, no fanfare. Just the quiet presence of law, entering a space that used to belong solely to Camille's reign. A woman stepped out, juvenile welfare advocate, not a uniformed officer, and walked up our pathway with a gentle confidence that felt like safety arriving on soft feet. My daughter clung to my hand, but curiosity nudged fear aside inch by inch. Meanwhile, Camille, the clipboard queen, appeared suddenly at the clubhouse, phone in hand, pacing like a commander whose army was retreating. Her voice carried across the lawn in short bursts. Legal jargon, HOA terminology, empty threats disguised as policy clarifications. She made calls so loudly that neighbors didn't need to eavesdrop. They could hear desperation in her tone without trying. After the advocate finished the welfare check, she requested a brief walk to the side of the property to verify location of incident. She didn't need access to Camille's yard, just visual reference. As we stepped outside, my brother joined us silently. Not imposing, not intimidating, just present. His presence was enough to shift how witnesses behaved. A teenage voice called from across the street. "Sheriff?" I turned. The boy from earlier stood there, hands shaking slightly. "Is it true they're, investigating?" he asked, words stumbling out like he wasn't sure he should say them out loud. His eyes darted toward the tyrant in heels, who watched us through clubhouse windows. He swallowed hard. "I think she told my mom what to say." I didn't pressure him. I didn't ask questions. I simply nodded gently and said, "Thank you." That was enough. He had already positioned himself as a potential witness without realizing it. Sometimes justice starts in whispers that break under their own fear. Later that afternoon, county investigators requested access to community surveillance logs, not HOA access, county request. That meant the officer of rules no longer controlled digital territory she previously patrolled like private property. The advocate explained quietly that once logs were reviewed, witness testimony and recordings would determine whether charges escalated. By sunset, a subtle transformation swept through Hawthorne Ridge. Parents who once avoided my gaze now offered tentative nods, some even whispering soft greetings, like they finally recognized who the real threat in this story was. Camille stood outside the clubhouse, blazer sharp as ever, but her expression, tight, pale, jaw clenched, looked nothing like victory. She refused to meet my eyes, turning away every time I walked by. As night settled, I tucked my daughter into bed, watching her breathe more evenly than she had since the kennel. I sat beside her, not as a sheriff collecting evidence, but as a father praying trauma would loosen its grip one day at a time. She whispered, "Are they going to stop her?" I didn't give her false certainty. I gave her truth powered by law. "Yes," I said quietly, "because some cages close on the people who build them." And somewhere across the neighborhood, Camille Prescott stared at a community she no longer controlled, slowly realizing she had become the one under investigation. Public confrontation in Hawthorne Ridge never happens with shouting. It happens with clipped sentences delivered behind polished microphones, where neighbors pretend not to choose sides while every eye is locked on whoever speaks next. The emergency HOA meeting was announced barely 24 hours after county investigators stepped inside the neighborhood, and every homeowner received a mandatory attendance notice signed, predictably, by Camille Prescott herself. Clarifying misinformation, she called it, clarifying, as if a kennel could be misunderstood. I walked into the clubhouse carrying a quiet stillness that startled people more than any public accusation could. My daughter stayed home with my sister-in-law, watching movies with the volume low. She didn't need to sit through a room full of adults debating whether her pain qualified as misconduct or misunderstanding. The moment I entered, conversations fractured into silence. Neighbors shifted in their seats, adjusting handbags, tapping pens, crossing arms, every gesture dripping discomfort. That's how guilt moves through a crowd, not loudly, but collectively. Camille stood at the front wearing her signature crimson blazer, the kind she used like armor. "Thank you all for coming," she said in that smooth, formal tone reserved for royalty or courtroom testimony. The microphone magnified her voice across the room, bouncing off polished flooring like a stage performance. She called the meeting to order as board chair, responsible for community safety and compliance. Every word rehearsed, every expression calculated. But her eyes, darting toward county personnel seated quietly in the back, revealed the tremor beneath authority. Behind Camille sat two board members staring at their papers like the text might save them from involvement. One avoided eye contact with me entirely, pretending to study the agenda packet. Another cleared his throat whenever Camille emphasized youth behavior problems. They looked like people realizing their signatures might soon appear on investigation reports. Then Camille attempted the unthinkable. She stood in front of the projector and played a slideshow titled "Understanding Juvenile Boundaries." Photos of fences, park rules, property lines flashed across the screen while she spoke about safety protocols. Not a single acknowledgement of the kennel, not a whisper of apology, only deflection masked as education. That deflection was her tactic, the same one the enforcer in crimson had polished for years. Control the narrative, punish dissent quietly. But tonight, she wasn't the only authoritative voice in the room. The county investigator raised her hand gently, her badge nowhere visible, but her presence unmistakable. Ms. Prescott, will community members be able to ask questions about current juvenile matters? She asked calmly. Camille blinked, twice. We can't discuss ongoing reviews, she replied stiffly. That was her mistake. Because by refusing, she signaled there was an active review she couldn't control. That's when a neighbor, usually silent, usually timid, stood and asked, "Is it true a child was locked in a kennel?" Gasps rippled through the room. Camille tried to reclaim the floor, insisting on proper terminology, but her voice cracked around the edges. The clipboard queen could command a microphone, but she couldn't command the truth that had already leaked into the room. My brother stood, not aggressively, just firmly, and introduced himself by title and division. The temperature of the room dropped instantly. The matter is currently under county investigation, he stated, voice steady and controlled. The welfare of a juvenile is our primary concern. No accusation, no emotional language, just law speaking where intimidation once ruled. Camille's face drained, her crimson blazer suddenly looking more like a warning siren than authority. The tyrant in heels stepped forward, attempting to sound reasonable. We're simply addressing inaccurate rumors, she insisted. But the county investigator added quietly, evidence has already been submitted. That was the strike Camille didn't see coming. Panic flickered across her face. Real, unmasked panic. A man from the back row stood. My son said he heard yelling that day, he blurted, voice shaking. Another mother whispered, we saw her being dragged. The whispers multiplied, uncontained now that law stood behind them. Fear had shifted sides. Camille lifted her chin, but her voice sounded thinner. This meeting is adjourned, she declared, abrupt, desperate. She snapped her binder closed, heels striking the polished floor with clipped panic. But the room didn't move. People stayed seated, processing what had just happened. Authority collapsing in real time. As I stepped out into the night air, my daughter's voice echoed in my memory. Are they gonna stop her? Tonight, I finally believed the answer wasn't just hope. It was inevitable. The officer of rules had spent years building cages for everyone else. But tonight, she realized something. Terrifying. Law doesn't care about HOA titles, crimson blazers, or clipboard authority. Law only cares about evidence. And Camille Prescott had just walked straight into a room full of it. Morning came quieter than any day since the kennel incident. The kind of quiet that feels earned instead of uneasy. I didn't rush to check emails or surveillance feeds. I just stood in my daughter's doorway watching her sleep, without flinching, without twitching, her breathing soft and peaceful for the first time in weeks. I knew the investigation wasn't over, but something had shifted permanently. The fear wasn't inside our home anymore. It was living across the neighborhood, wearing a crimson blazer and realizing the world she built was collapsing under the weight of law. By noon, official notices arrived in every homeowner's inbox. County Juvenile Services had initiated formal review of conduct by individuals in positions of community authority. No names listed, but every resident knew exactly who was being referenced. And for the first time, Hawthorne Ridge didn't react with silence. They reacted with relief. Parents forwarded the notice to each other, nervous but hopeful, as if someone had finally turned on a light after months of pretending the dark wasn't dangerous. I stepped outside and felt neighbors' eyes on me, not the suspicious kind, not the hesitant fear I'd endured in those early days. This was different. People nodded respectfully, some even offering awkward smiles, grateful ones, the kind that say thank you for saying what the rest of us were afraid to admit. And that's when I understood the truth. Sometimes a community doesn't need a hero. They just need someone brave enough to stop pretending the villain isn't real. That afternoon, Camille Prescott marched across the cul-de-sac with the posture of someone still trying to rehearse control. But her pace was uneven, her voice too sharp as she spoke into her phone like she was pleading instead of commanding. She didn't look toward my house, not once. The board chair, who once controlled every whispered narrative, couldn't meet my eyes now that county investigators had seen what she tried to bury. Around 4 p.m., county officials requested full HOA access. Logs, correspondence, disciplinary notices, including evidence of juvenile disputes. The HOA office shuttered early, blinds pulled, lights off. I watched through my window as the enforcer in crimson slipped inside with a stack of folders like she still believed the paperwork could rewrite criminal evidence. But the difference now was simple. Those documents weren't under her authority anymore. They were evidence under county review. At dusk, I walked my daughter to the gazebo. She hesitated at first, fingers tightening around mine, but she took each step bravely, like reclaiming something stolen. Fireflies blinked around the benches where she once played, soft little lights dancing just like those. Childhood nights before the kennel changed everything. She sat beside me quietly, her head leaning against my shoulder. "Does the kennel still exist?" she asked. "Not for you," I told her. "Never again." And I meant every syllable. Law had taken that cage and turned it into proof. And proof doesn't fade because someone claims innocence behind polished legal terms. Later, the county liaison called with preliminary findings. Evidence supported juvenile endangerment, unlawful confinement, and potential coercion of witnesses. Further action pending legal review. That sentence wasn't just procedural, it was the beginning of accountability. And accountability is the only cage the clipboard queen never planned for. I stood on my porch that night, watching porch lights flicker on across Hawthorne Ridge, each one a tiny declaration that fear wasn't dictating this neighborhood anymore. People walked dogs without glancing nervously toward Camille's house. Children rode bikes again. It was like the community had exhaled for the first time in years. Somewhere behind closed blinds, the tyrant in heels was pacing, considering every step she took in the weeks leading up to this moment. The kennel, the coaching, the flyers, the whispered orders. And now she was facing something she couldn't intimidate. Evidence, procedure, and outside authority that didn't answer to her, didn't fear her, didn't negotiate with her illusions of power. My daughter held my hand as we turned to go back inside. "Are we done?" she asked softly. I paused, watching the last bit of daylight fade over the rooftops. "We're better," I answered, "and better is enough for now." If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.